Deep in the misty valleys of the Appalachian Mountains, whispers of a family curse have echoed for generations. Locals say that in one forgotten hollow, blood was never allowed to mix with outsiders. They called it keeping the blood pure. What began as tradition soon turned into something far more disturbing, something that produced faces with unsettling features, children who rarely spoke, and a darkness no one dared investigate. For decades, travelers vanished near that hollow, and every time the police were called, their reports disappeared just as quickly. Outsiders who dared to ask too many questions were warned, "Don't go digging where the soil runs red." Tonight, we uncover the horrifying truth of a family who lived by their own rules, where love, blood, and fear became one twisted legacy. This is not just a story of inbreeding. It's a story of power, secrecy, and the chilling price of keeping a bloodline untouched. The Appalachian Mountains are filled with small, forgotten towns where life seems frozen in time. One such place, tucked away in the shadow of thick forests and steep ridges, was the isolated settlement of Miller Hollow. Outsiders rarely visited, and those who stumbled upon it often described the people there as wary, secretive, and unsettlingly quiet. For generations, whispers spread among neighboring communities about strange practices in Miller Hollow. The families who lived there rarely intermarried with outsiders, and many said it was because of an old belief. To keep the blood pure was to keep the family strong. But behind that belief lurked something far more disturbing. Reports from travelers who ventured too far into the hollow told of children with unusual appearances, faces slightly warped, eyes set unevenly, and mouths that seemed unable to form full sentences. Some swore they heard wailing at night that wasn't animal, wasn't human, but something in between. Yet no official investigation ever lasted long. Records would vanish, witnesses would move away, and the story of Miller Hollow remained a dark piece of mountain folklore. What made it worse was the land itself. The hollow was nearly unreachable, with roads that turned to mud in rain, trails that vanished into thick brush, and an unshakable silence that made outsiders feel unwelcome. A single weather-worn church stood at the center, its paint peeling, the cross tilted with age. Beside it sat rows of small cabins, each with shuttered windows and broken porches. The town seemed frozen in the 19th century, untouched by progress, untouched by light. Locals from nearby towns would warn curious visitors, "Don't go near Miller Hollow. They don't take kindly to strangers. And if you hear singing in the woods, run." These warnings were dismissed as superstition by many, until the disappearances began to mount. Hunters who set off into the hollow never returned. A young couple traveling the back roads was found dead in their car, but their child was never located. And every time suspicion pointed toward Miller Hollow, the trail went cold. Some believed the family in Miller Hollow had made a pact long ago, a pact sealed in blood, binding them to their own kind, no matter the cost. Whether it was madness, tradition, or something darker, no one knew. But what was certain was this: Miller Hollow guarded its secrets, and those secrets were buried deep in the bloodline itself. It was the autumn of 1987, when the first disappearance shook the nearby town of Ashford. A young woman named Claire Jennings, just 22, was driving through the winding mountain roads on her way to visit family. Her car was later found abandoned on the edge of Miller Hollow, its headlights still burning, the keys left in the ignition. There were no signs of struggle, just an eerie silence that wrapped the scene like a shroud. Search parties were organized, and for days men with flashlights and dogs combed the woods. They found torn pieces of Claire's red sweater snagged on branches, leading deeper into the hollow. But every time they approached the settlement, the locals stood silently on their porches, watching with cold, expressionless eyes. No one offered help. No one answered questions. Instead, the searchers reported something unsettling. Children with uneven features, peeking from behind broken shutters, whispering in tones that didn't sound like any language they knew. One deputy claimed he saw movement in the woods at night, a pale figure darting between trees, long-limbed and silent, its outline just human enough to terrify him. He fired his weapon into the darkness, but there was no blood, no tracks. The dogs refused to go further, pulling back with whimpers. After 2 weeks, the search was called off. Claire was never found. Rumors began to spread quickly. Some said Claire had been taken in by the Miller family to join their bloodline. Others whispered that her fate had been far worse, her body buried in unmarked ground, like so many before her. The sheriff's office, under pressure from county officials, declared it an unsolved missing persons case and quietly moved on. But for those who lived in Ashford, the silence of Miller Hollow became something to fear more than anything else. Late at night, truckers reported hearing faint singing carried on the wind when driving past the hollow. It wasn't melodic. It was broken, jagged, like the sound of voices that didn't know how to form words. Hunters claimed to see lights flickering between the trees, like lanterns being carried by unseen hands. And those who dared to whisper too much about Claire Jennings often stopped speaking altogether, as if they knew prying too deep into Miller Hollow meant inviting its darkness into their own homes. The Millers were not just another Appalachian family. They were the hollow itself. No one could remember when they first settled there, but local legends suggested their roots stretched back to the late 1700s. They had been farmers once, living off the land, but as time went on, the outside world drifted away from them, and they from it. By the early 1900s, the family had stopped marrying outsiders altogether. Cousin married cousin, brother married sister, and soon the generations blurred into something twisted and unrecognizable. Visitors who dared to glimpse the Millers up close often described their appearance with hushed horror. Some had mismatched eyes, one larger than the other. Some had noses that seemed collapsed into their faces, and many walked with strange, jerking movements, as if their limbs didn't obey them fully. Their speech was worse, garbled, slurred, often no more than grunts and noises. Yet behind those warped features lurked a watchful intelligence, a silent hostility toward anyone who did not carry their blood. The Miller homestead sat deep in the hollow, surrounded by overgrown fields and rotting fences. Dozens of shacks, leaning and sagging with age, dotted the landscape. Laundry lines hung between trees with clothes that looked decades old. At the center was the largest cabin, a looming structure of dark wood with boarded-up windows, its roof caving inward. Locals said that was where the patriarch lived, a figure rarely seen, known only as Old Man Miller. He was said to be nearly 80, a frail shadow who had fathered children well into his later years, ensuring the bloodline remained pure. The family moved as a unit. When one was seen, more weren't far behind. Hunters reported glimpsing groups of them in the trees, watching silently. Strangers who knocked on doors for directions were met with blank stares and the quiet creak of shutters closing. Even law enforcement avoided stepping onto the property unless absolutely necessary. They weren't just a family anymore. They were a closed society, bound together by fear, blood, and a belief system no outsider could understand. What terrified people most wasn't their appearance, but the idea that they were hiding something bigger, something they would kill to protect. And in the case of Claire Jennings, many suspected that the Millers had already done exactly that. By 1991, whispers of Miller Hollow had grown louder, and not everyone was content to let its secrets rot in the woods. Deputy Aaron Harker, a young officer in Ashford with a reputation for stubbornness, became obsessed with the Jennings case. He had heard the rumors, the stories of inbreeding, the pale figures in the trees, but he wanted proof. One October evening, armed with nothing more than a flashlight, a sidearm, and his determination, he drove into the hollow. The dirt road narrowed until it became nothing more than a trail, his cruiser grinding to a halt against roots and rocks. The silence was suffocating. No crickets, no owls, just the sound of his boots crunching through leaves as he pressed deeper into Miller territory. Soon he saw them. The shacks leaning at odd angles, their chimneys belching weak trails of smoke. A rotten stench clung to the air, sour, sweet, and unmistakably human. He crept closer to the largest cabin. Its door was slightly ajar, creaking in the breeze. From inside, a sound rose that froze him in place. A low, broken humming. It wasn't a song, not exactly, but something like a child mimicking a lullaby. When he leaned forward, he saw movement through the cracks in the wood. Figures, half-glimpsed, shifting in the dark. One of them was crouched in the corner, rocking back and forth, its face hidden in shadow. Then came the smell. Stronger now. Aaron's stomach turned as his flashlight beam caught something in the dirt, outside the cabin. A shallow pit, recently dug, its edges damp. Bones protruded from the soil, small and fragile. Not animal bones. Human. The deputy backed away, breath caught in his throat. But the humming grew louder, joined by more voices, as if the walls themselves were alive with sound. Shapes moved in the cabin, slow and deliberate. Then he heard it, the snap of a twig behind him. Turning, his beam fell on a child, if it could be called that. Its eyes were wide and uneven, its teeth jagged, its face sunken but smiling. And in its hand, it clutched a piece of red fabric. Claire Jennings's sweater. Deputy Aaron froze as the child grinned, clutching the torn fabric tighter. Behind him, the cabin door swung wider, and from the shadows emerged more figures. They shuffled forward in silence, their limbs twisted, their faces warped by generations of blood, mixing with blood. Some hissed, others gurgled broken words, but none of them spoke in a way Aaron could understand. Yet their message was clear. He was not welcome, and he was not leaving. Then, from within the cabin, an old voice broke the silence, deep, cracked, commanding. "Bring him in." The Millers parted, revealing the patriarch himself, Old Man Miller. His body was frail, hunched like a corpse in motion, but his eyes burned with a sharpness that sent shivers down Aaron's spine. This man, though ancient, held power over them all, and in his gaze was no confusion, no madness, only a chilling certainty. Inside the cabin, the deputy's flashlight revealed horrors that would never make it into an official report. Along the walls hung scraps of clothing, shoes, and jewelry, belongings of people who had vanished over decades. In the center of the room was a long wooden table, stained dark, its surface scarred from countless cuts. The air reeked of decay, and in the corner, huddled beneath a filthy blanket, were two children. But these were not Miller-born. Their features were different, normal. Their eyes pleaded for help. Aaron realized then what the townsfolk had whispered about, but never dared to confirm. The Millers weren't just keeping their blood pure. They were also taking outsiders, sometimes to force into their bloodline, sometimes for something far worse. Old Man Miller stepped forward, placing a skeletal hand on one of the children's shoulders. "The blood must be fed," he rasped. The deputy's hand went to his weapon, but before he could draw, the room erupted. Figures lunged from the shadows, dozens of them, clawing, shrieking, their malformed faces illuminated in brief flashes of light. The last thing Aaron saw before his flashlight shattered was the smile of Old Man Miller, a smile that promised no one left Miller Hollow unless the family allowed it. And they had not allowed it for a very, very long time. The cabin exploded with chaos. Deputy Aaron fought with every ounce of strength he had as the Millers swarmed him, clawing with jagged nails and teeth. Their bodies were wiry but strong, fueled by something primal. His pistol fired once, the deafening crack echoing through the hollow. One figure dropped, shrieking, but the others didn't falter. They pressed closer, their distorted faces filling his vision. In the frenzy, Aaron's flashlight rolled across the floor, its weak beam revealing the pit in the far corner, a hole lined with bones, stacked high like firewood. Skulls, ribs, and femurs spilled out in grotesque piles. The smell was overwhelming. These weren't just the remains of strangers. These were trophies, evidence of decades, maybe centuries, of killings. The Millers hadn't just been breeding within their own line. They had been feeding on anyone unfortunate enough to wander too close. With a desperate surge, Aaron shoved one of them aside and bolted for the door. He tore through the night, branches whipping against his face, the sound of heavy footsteps and guttural howls chasing him. Behind him, lanterns flared to life, carried by more Millers, pouring out from hidden shacks. Their distorted voices rose together in a chilling chorus, half screams, half songs, that echoed through the hollow like a hymn of madness. He stumbled down the trail, lungs burning, pistol clutched tight. Then he heard it, the sharp crack of something breaking above. Before he could move, a figure dropped from the trees, tackling him into the dirt. Its face hovered inches from his own, skin sagging, eyes uneven, drool running down its chin. With trembling hands, Aaron jammed the pistol beneath its jaw and pulled the trigger. The body convulsed, then went limp. But there were more, always more. The trees seemed alive with movement, shapes darting between shadows. He knew he couldn't outrun in them all. Up ahead, the faint glow of the main road shimmered through the fog. It was his only chance. Summoning the last of his strength, he sprinted, ignoring the stabbing pain in his leg from a fall. The chorus grew louder, closing in. At the edge of the clearing, he burst through the tree line, just as the Millers' howls cut off in unison. He turned, gasping, gun raised. But the hollow behind him was silent, empty. Not a single figure stood in the trees. It was as if the Millers had melted back into the forest, leaving only their echo and the stench of decay to haunt him. Deputy Aaron stumbled onto the asphalt of the mountain road, his chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion. For a moment, he thought he had made it, that somehow he had outrun the nightmare of Miller Hollow. But as his eyes adjusted to the glow of his cruiser's headlights, he saw something that froze the breath in his lungs. The red fabric from Claire Jennings' sweater, the very piece the child had clutched, now lay neatly folded on the hood of his car. Someone had been waiting. Aaron's instincts screamed at him to leave. He jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and tore down the mountain road, gravel spitting beneath his tires. In his rearview mirror, the hollow remained cloaked in darkness, but he swore he saw flickers of lantern light bobbing in the trees, following, watching, waiting. Back in Ashford, Aaron filed his report, but the sheriff dismissed it almost immediately. No mention of bones, no mention of children, no mention of the Millers. Within days, the official paperwork was altered. The case was labeled unsolved, and Aaron was warned to let it go. "You don't poke around in Miller Hollow," the sheriff muttered, his eyes betraying a fear he refused to admit. But Aaron couldn't let it go. He began digging through old archives, pulling missing persons files from decades past. The deeper he went, the more he uncovered. Patterns of disappearances stretching back over 100 years, all connected to that same patch of land. Entire families vanished without a trace, their belongings later surfacing in pawnshops miles away, sold by unknown sellers. Each time suspicion crept toward Miller Hollow, it was buried under silence. Aaron left the force within a year. Some say he moved far away, unable to sleep without hearing the Millers' chorus in his dreams. Others whisper he never left at all, that one night he returned to the hollow, pistol in hand, determined to burn it all to the ground. He was never seen again. Today, Miller Hollow still stands. The cabins rot a little more with each passing season, but smoke is still said to rise from the chimneys. Hikers speak of strange voices in the woods, and truckers swear they see figures watching from the tree line. The legend of keeping the blood pure is no longer just a story. It's a warning, because some bloodlines never die.